All right, what were the chapters you read for today?
6 and 11.
So tell me, everybody think of one thing from chapter 6. Do you know why I make you tell me things out of these chapters?
See what we remember.
See if you remember. Yeah, it's like to make your brain resurrect those ideas one more time, which makes you remember them better. That's why. So think of something from chapter 6, something interesting or worthwhile or useful or boring or anything. And let's do this, like half of you give me some from chapter 6 and half of you give me some from chapter what?
11.
11.
Reading from chapter 6, I remember it was short.
Short? So that's pleasant, a pleasant change.
Oh, so
for this
nice,
month, right?
more to the point,
Yeah.
very, more concise.
Yeah. Good. Did that help? Would it make it easier to learn besides just being less reading?
Yeah, because I was like, sometimes it's really long, my brain's like, give me a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. You almost don't remember the longer you're reading.
Good point. How many of you noticed that? Did you notice that as you read that it was easier? Okay, good to
And a
know.
lot of times, like the box parts, just like sum up the key points. So I feel like if I look at the box parts, I pretty much get the gist of it.
Yeah. How many of you do that thing where you only read like the first 2 sentences of some paragraphs? That reading process. Saves some time, doesn't it? Do you think you still get the message well enough? Good. Anything else from chapter? Yeah.
I like what we're talking about skimming deeper kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because like I skim a lot, so like just basically what I got from it, you're just critically thinking while you skim it. So you're just like, while you're skimming an article, you're deciding if you want to use it, if the sources are like valid and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
I
Good.
like that.
Yeah, that's good. That's useful. Because you have to read a lot of things, and whatever makes your time more valuable.
I liked how it went in on how to help you find like articles and whatnot beyond just go to the library, because it did say all those things and stuff, but because I'm having a problem finding articles that are under like 30 to 100 pages for my topic. And I'm like, I do not have time to read 100 pages,
Yeah.
you know? And so when it said to go in and look at some of their references or what they cited,
Yeah.
it helped me find other things,
Yeah.
so I could find something a little bit easier.
And you know those will be right on target with what they were talking about, so that's
Yeah.
useful.
So I liked that.
Did I show you guys already the research process video I made that talks about all these steps too? Like starting with, I know we talked about the research process, start with general reference material, Wikipedia, get the terms, the names, maybe even find some links to articles, then take those terms or names, whatever you want to search on, to the databases and all that. We talked about that day 2 probably, do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, anyway, if you're still looking up articles, which most of you probably still are, I would go to U of Life and watch that research process video, because it's succinct, you know, it's pretty to the point and saves you a lot of time. So watch that for review.
I'd like to comment about paying attention to the bibliography. You know, the same person is mentioned in several articles.
Yeah,
You may want to look at something he's authored.
good. Like he's some prolific writer on this subject. Okay, good. Anything else on that one? Okay, the rest of you got a comment about chapter 11?
I like how it walked through the proposal,
Yeah.
because I was looking ahead and I was like, oh, I have a proposal, peer review, what the heck is, like, I didn't know where to go.
Coming
And then all
right
of a
up.
sudden I opened chapter 11 and I was like, well, isn't that funny? You know, and it walked it through and it, you know, gave you steps on, you know, you need to do this. How you can do that is doing this, this, and this, and that. So
Yeah.
instead of just telling you what it needs to contain, it gave you, you know, tips or help to actually do those. Some of them are almost ridiculously detailed,
Yeah,
but it still was nice.
good. And timely, it's almost like I planned that.
I know, I should have expected it, but I wasn't.
Good. What else about 11?
The same thing about the annotated bibliography. I was wondering what that was, but that cleared it up.
Yeah. And it's pretty easy, isn't it? Just make a few comments, a little summary, a little evaluation, something. Anything else about 11?
There's a lot on doing interviews,
Mm-hmm.
which was nice, but at the same time, for me, it was like, I don't know if I necessarily need to read into this too much.
Yeah.
Because it gave you like, it told you, call your person the morning of to remind them of the interview. It's
Yeah.
like, that's like a little too much detail, you know what I mean? But it was still helpful.
Yeah, a lot of people don't value that because they think I'm not going to do an interview, but it was a very thorough treatment.
It was thorough, yeah.
Yeah, and if you read that once, you're kind of aware that you shouldn't just walk in with a couple loosely formed questions, you know, go prepared. So yeah, I like that. By the way, you know in your final paper how you have to have 5 academic sources? If you do an interview or a survey or some kind of primary research like that, you can count that for one of your 5. So if you're thinking about that, I encourage you to. It's a cool experience to try that out. Anything else for 11? All right. How would you feel if we wrote the proposal paper in class today?
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Good, because that's my plan. I mean, you know, you have to revise it and clean it up and stuff, but let's get it partly done. Before we do, summarize everything you remember about what the book said belongs in a proposal. Because we're going to do ours a little bit differently, maybe a lot differently, but summarize proposal for me first.
Describe your purpose, define your methods, discuss implications, include supporting research, like anything that y'all are doing questions.
And a timeline.
Good. What else? Anything else? That's a good list. Why do you write proposals? What's the purpose? Did it talk about that?
I can't remember.
Okay. Why do you think?
Probably helps focus your viewpoint and
True. Yeah, and that's
what you really want to talk about.
yeah, and that's the angle we're going to write our proposal like. But usually when you write proposals, I think there's another really important reason too. Any idea what that would be?
Well, it's almost like an outline before your outline,
Mm-hmm.
because it's, you know, it's almost like in there you talked about how you're supposed to set timeframes, so you're keeping yourself on track,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so you should be able to follow through with it. And it kind of sets up everything for you, so all you have to do is go through the box and check it off and say, okay, I did that, okay, I did that, okay, I did that, and at
Yeah.
the end of it, you're done.
The plan, talk about writing process, right?
Mhm.
Planning out not just the content, but everything you gotta do. Is the proposal written for yourself or for someone else?
Someone else.
Good. Because what you said so far, these are ways it helped you. So, and that's totally valid. If you write it for someone else, who else would it be for?
Someone who might want to read your article, get like a snapshot.
Okay, and who might that be? Who might want to know about your article before you even have written it?
Your intended audience.
Yeah, okay, so apparently this wasn't in the book. Let me tell you 2 examples. One is if you want to be a real author and stuff, you don't usually write something and then start going to publishers and say, hey, you want to publish? See, look what I did, you want to publish it? What they'll often do is approach some publisher and say, look, I'm going to write this paper, I'm going to do this research. Would you be interested in publishing the final? And if they say, yeah, do it. Then you're like, okay, now I have purpose. Instead of writing the whole thing, submitting it, nobody wants it, you just wasted all your time. So that's a really common use for that. So journals, other publishers. The second common reason is think of it as a grant proposal, where you say, I want to do this research, but I need funding. And so you write to some foundation that has grant money for research in this area, and you say, this is my whole plan, this is what I'm going to do. How would you like to give me $50,000? Do you think somebody would want to give you $50,000 for a plan? You haven't even researched yet, you haven't even written it yet?
Well, they might give you
An advance.
or something, and
Yeah.
then get the rest after it's done.
Yeah, they might. And why would they want to give you any money at all or promise you money?
Because we're awesome.
That's the main reason.
Yeah.
Why else?
Because your proposal sold it.
Yeah, and how do you sell your proposal? Why would somebody care about, why would they get excited? They're reading your proposal and like, oh, I want this to happen. I don't want to do it myself. I'll pay you to do it. Why would they
Something
care?
like maybe that hasn't been explored, or a different viewpoint, or something that could advance,
Uh-huh.
things.
Good. And there are things that, you write to the grant proposal to some foundation that cares about your area of research.
Well, it could be like a business proposal too.
True.
Business proposal, starting a business.
Yeah, good point. So you put in things that are going to sell your audience, that make them think, this is great, I really want you to do it, I'll support you, I'll publish you. Yes, let's sign some little contract about it, based on your proposal. So in that case, how important is it that your proposal is well written?
$50,000 worth.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you're looking for. But that's like your first impression. They look at it and say, this is a thorough person, or they say, I don't even know what they're really talking about. It's unclear. They throw it in the garbage. But if they're like thorough and like, oh, I can see you know what you're doing. You're going to do these studies the right way. I can see that you've got a whole plan. You're likely to succeed because you have such a good plan. I'm sold. Whereas if you say, hey, I want to research dolphins and find out how smart they really are, people are like, well, how are you going to do that? And they're not sold because they're not convinced by your proposal. Right? So in those cases, that's a big reason for writing proposals, is selling your idea to someone probably who will support you or publish you. So what we'll do with our proposal, though, is back more like what Alexis said, and Chelsea, it's more like these, we're going to write it just to help you in your writing process to make sure that your final product comes out good. And part of that's because we got 7 weeks, so we're crunching everything in. And part of it's because a lot of the skills you would learn by writing a proposal directed to someone else to sell them on your idea, you're going to learn those same skills in the final paper. So it's all right that we don't apply them the same way in this paper. So I've got a list of 11 items, well, 10 really, that you're going to put into your proposal just to help you plan out your final paper. So let's go through these one at a time, and I'll give you time to write down, brainstorm, write down your ideas, and even discuss them a little bit tonight to make sure that you're ready to nail it. So first thing is, write down, what is your research question? Who remembers the difference between having a topic and a research question when you go to research your paper? What difference does it make?
Well, something that you can make a change.
Okay.
Because
But a topic could be that way.
You can look at what you're looking at and throw out what you don't need if it doesn't apply to your question.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest useful things is if you just have a general topic, you're coming up with articles, you don't know if it's what you want. But if you have a research question, you can say, does this answer my question? Yes, keep it. No, move on. That is one of the most useful parts of having a research question. What's another useful part about having a research question?
Helps you to stay focused on one topic, or is that kind of the same as what he said?
No, I think that's an excellent point. He said, choosing sources. Yeah, it keeps you, because if you have a question you're going to answer, every single word of your final paper should build toward the answer. I mean, if that's your purpose, maybe to get people to take action on it, so, maybe a little bit more than just that. But everything in the paper should contribute to that, and if you don't, you're off focus, or you need to re-clarify what your focus is or something. Good. And I can think of one more really good reason, benefit of having a research question. 4 letters, starts with a B. I. A. Bias. Yeah, it helps protect you against your own bias. Because if you're asking a question, you might be looking for answers for multiple sides. But if you just have a topic, you might have it already in your head. You might not be looking for additional information that you didn't know about before, kind of thing. So it can help protect you against that. So under number 1, under the research question, by the way, each of these items in your proposal, let's just make the format really simple. You can do a little introduction if you want, but give me visual transitions. In other words, give me a header that says research question, and then talk about your research question. And here's what you'll talk about. You'll maybe say what it is, explain it. You can talk about what you already know and what you still have to find out about it. So there might be a little bit of summary about your topic. You can create a gap. How many have heard that phrase before? Create a gap. How many have heard the name John Swales? John Swales figured out that all academic writing, there are really only 3 things it does. Sometimes more than one, but he made a metaphor like it's a dance. So these are 3 moves. And as you read your academic articles, you can watch and see which ones they're doing, and that's one more way to make it a little more interesting. So the first step, he said, is create a gap. And a gap means, he says, like, it's pointing out, look, here's something we don't know. So I'm going to go research it and answer this question. So if it's, like for example, do you guys know what I ate for breakfast this morning? No, you don't. So is there a gap? Is it important? Do you need to know? Do you want to know? No, you don't really care, right? So creating a gap is not only saying, here's something we don't know, but it's also adding significance about that. Importance. Saying why it matters. So you ask your research question, you tell your readers, like, here's what I want to find out. This is crucial. Okay, so there's creating a gap. What's the obvious other step that kind of goes with that? Created a gap, what might another article do?
Explain or fill the gap.
Yes, that's exactly it. Fill the gap, answer those questions. Say, look, we didn't know this, here's my research results. Now we know a little bit more. And the third one is might give an overview of other research. Especially if you get like one type of article is just called a literature review. And sometimes some articles will have inside it a literature review. It's like, look, here's the research that's been done, here's the notable stuff. It's almost like an annotated bibliography. This guy wrote this stuff, these guys wrote this stuff. Kind of a background information. So that's another one of the things that you can do with your research. So in your research question, you're at least going to do, that one, say why it matters. So maybe somebody, as they're reading your proposal, they just read this one section, you're like, I want to find out what planet the dolphins came from, and here's what, Douglas Adams fans would go up for that, no one else would. But anyway, just get people's interest and stuff. Number 2, what is your purpose? What is your action purpose? What are you going to try to get readers to do? And make sure your paper, your purpose has an observable action. So it's not just convincing them, it's not them. Make them think this is great, because you can't see them do that. Convincing someone of any idea looks like this. That's all you get. Oh, okay. It's hard to observe that. So have a more observable action than that. And with your action, you can talk about, sell that, explain why it matters. Like, I want to get people in abusive relationships to contact one of these services that's there to support them. Even if they don't leave the relationship yet, at least make that first contact. And then explain, why is that so important? Because suddenly, now a new opportunity, new choice is open. They've gone through a comfort zone barrier. They're aware of something they can turn to. And it's the first step in the rest of their life, which will be longer than if they don't contact someone, for example. So sell them on your action. These don't have to be in order, by the way. You can put this in any order that makes sense best to you. The third one is audience. Narrow audience. Who are you addressing? And then explain, convince the reader why that's the best audience for you to write to. For example, they're the ones that can take that action. Or they're the one who want it most or who need it most. Number 4 is values, audience values. Why does the audience care about this topic? Why will they find your paper valuable? Number 5 is barriers. What will stop them from taking that action? Fear, money, time, knowledge, opportunity. What's in their way? Number 6, sources. What kind of sources will you use and why? For example, you're getting academic sources. Why is it important to get reliable academic sources? If you want, you can say because Sean required it in the class. Whatever. Which main points, main claims in your arguments do you need to support with other outside evidence or examples or whatever? So just anything about sources. Will you do any primary research? Or just look up other people's research? Number 7, bias. What do you feel strongly about in your own paper that you need to be aware of your own bias and make sure you stay fair? How will you reduce your bias? Like telling the other side or making concessions, admit the frailty of your plan or any 3 parts. Number 8, strategies. List any strategies you plan to use in your paper to make your readers cooperative or interested. Those are the main things you try and do with strategies. And we'll talk more about that tonight. I'll give you several examples. Number 9, outline. Describe and defend your organization. And I'll tell you several choices for organization tonight. And then provide an actual outline of your paper. As many points as you can think of that will go into your paper. So describe and defend your organization. And then write an outline of it. Some of you mentioned in your writing history paper, I think, about wanting to be more converted to the writing process. So one reason we're doing this in the paper is just to reinforce that, so you can have a detailed outline and see how much it helps make the writing the paper easier. And then the last one, number 10, schedule. Just like it said in the book. Make a schedule of the tasks before you in writing this paper, and make a list of them and put deadlines for yourself. Obviously you don't have to follow this, but it'll give you a good idea, help you from falling behind. The nice thing is, one nice thing is after this paper, after the proposal, which we're doing a peer review on Thursday, when it's due next Tuesday, then we're really just working on the final paper for the rest of the time. So the more detail, the more thought you put into planning your final paper in this proposal will alleviate so much stress and work and changing and revision and frustration. So do put some thought into this, and we'll have some discussion time too to help work out kinks and get more ideas and everything. We should do some of that next time too when you're. Oh, duh, we're doing peer review, so there it is. Any questions about any of those points so far?
Sorry, for some reason I didn't write anything down. When you said, what is your purpose? I know what that means, but what did you say right after you said that?
Action purpose. So what's the action, the observable action that your readers will take? And then, why does it matter? Why is that important? So this paper is kind of like explain and defend. Say, I'm going to do this because it'll work. It's going to change the world. Or whatever, somebody's world. And because it's going to get me an A+. Which has never happened at UVU before. I'll be the first. Okay, are you ready for some details then? Do you want to hear first about strategy or about organization? Strategy. Okay, strategy it is. So who remembers what I just said a few minutes ago about the main 2 purposes of strategies when you write?
Keep the reader interested or cooperative.
Good, cooperative and interested. Give me an example of something you've read when you have not felt cooperative. When you resisted, you're looking for flaws.
My first article.
Yeah, so an academic article you read. How many of you have read something this semester that you're irritated and not just going along with the ideas? That's awesome. Okay, good. All right. So,
I was about to say, man, I suck.
It happens. It definitely happens. What made it? Okay, so basic maintenance strategies, keeping your ethos, when we talk about different paper structures, we'll talk about a few more ways to keep interest. Significance is another one. Just keep them feeling like I'm receiving valuable information. You might have to remind them why it's valuable, or just supply good information that they're considered valuable. Another one is humor. If you know, or just making it enjoyable reading. But with humor, just know, like we talked about last time briefly, it's dangerous. Because if you try and be funny and you miss, it's kind of like chalk on the, or fingers on the chalkboard, or, you know, it really stands out. So be careful with that. And then there's some strategies to manage your opposition. So if you're writing to someone who disagrees with you kind of off the bat, here's a few strategies for them. Common ground is a great one. If you start your paper off on common ground so that they see that you're being reasonable and they're, you know, don't have a reason to resist you right off, then they may, you know, that may carry in, as you get into things that they disagree with, they may be willing to listen to you because they think you're being
Well,
been
didn't it
fair
say in
so
the
far.
book that when you want to change someone's way of thinking or values, you either have to be so good that they agree with you and they lessen their personal values, or that the other one where it was like something about you. I remember reading it. It said,
Yeah. Did anyone else remember reading that?
it was in
I
the-
said that in class last time.
But it was in the book too, because it said
Okay.
either they need to lower their expectations and agree with you a little bit, or you need to lower yours a little bit and feed them a little bit, or something.
In order to find some common ground in there.
I
have
don't
a
really
reasonable
remember.
purpose. Yeah. Yeah, and so the way I said it was, pick a value that you agree with and build that up, or pick a value that they have and you don't agree with and decrease that. Yeah. Concessions. So obviously we're not talking about buying someone a soft drink at the game. That might work in some circles, but to make a concession is to concede that your side is not perfect. So a politician, let me use a different example. You might say, we should put the nuclear waste in Nicaragua, not Nevada, or something like that. You say, no, I admit this is unfair and manipulative, and we pay them a lot of money, but they would, you know, so I'm not saying that's a good proposal at all, but you admit some flaw or some weakness in your position. And then what do you think when you hear someone make a concession, instead of being like, my way is perfect, there's nothing wrong with mine?
You're more open.
Yeah, why?
Because it's like, okay, well, this person is open to suggestions.
Right. They're being fair, they're not manipulative. I don't need to defend myself because he's not attacking or she or whatever. Yeah. Have you ever known anyone who's like so conceited, like everything I do is perfect?
Yep.
Youngest
All the
children,
time.
huh? I wish I had that syndrome where I thought that way. It seems like it would make life so much easier. But how about, you know, some cocky friend and totally irritating, whatever, and then one day they get a little humble and say, hey, I'm really sorry, I spit in your coffee. That wasn't cool. You know? So that's kind of like making a concession. And yeah, it helps. Yeah, yeah, they would. Be like, oh, I'm sorry, I poured that scalding drink down your shirt. Not really, but a little bit. Yeah. Okay, another good one is to take the other side. So the best example I can remember, always comes to mind for this, is one of my students was writing about should marijuana be legalized. And it started out and it said, you know, when I was a teenager, I used to smoke dope a couple times a week, and I don't think it was a big deal. And you know, people don't tend to get high and then abuse their spouse, like with alcohol. It's not bad as alcohol, and they went off on all these reasons why it should be legalized. And they're like, what about medical reasons? Let's examine it. And all of a sudden, they started coming up with some facts about either addiction or maybe the one like where it lowers your IQ by 10 points if you smoke a ton before you're 18, if you're a regular pot smoker, and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not worth it. So he totally changed his position mid-paper. Is that okay, or is that confusing?
I think on the way you do it, it could be.
Yeah. So can you see how his audience was reacting? I mean, who's his audience?
People smoke pot.
Yeah, pro-legalization people, right? And so they start out with he's on their side. And they're like, right on, dude, you tell him, pass the crackers. But, and then they're open, they're not resisting, and all of a sudden they get to this part and they're like, the information goes right in, they've let down their defenses.
So it's like it's in before they even know it.
Yeah. Whereas if you would have led with that and said, look, it's just not worth it. You know, this medical, birth defects, whatever, isn't worth it. People who don't, a lot of people wouldn't want to listen to him, would they? So they'd resist. So he took the other side, and
It's almost like that one paper we read where it was making fun of Generation Y or whatever, and then all of a sudden it went into
Yes.
or it was making fun of Generation Y, and then it went to they're actually kind of good.
yeah, perfect example. Yeah, exactly. Here's another one, stay tuned. If you hint that you're going to switch sides, for example, let's say you want to get the point across, pot is bad for your health. And if you just come out and say it, people will resist. So you just throw this tricky word in front, although, and you say, although pot's bad for your health. Now what comes next?
I smoked it when I was a teenager.
Yeah, it's something opposite. So it hints you're going to diminish that claim later. So say, although it's bad for your health, and like, yeah, what? See, now open. But it could, although it's bad for your health, a lot of people still smoke it. See, so you don't have to go against yourself to do that, but there's taking the other side. This is a really good one. Don't shoot the messenger. If you have something unpopular to say, unpopular with your audience, don't say it. Quote someone else. Then your author, your ethos as the author is fine. You're just quoting someone else. You're not making that assertion, making that claim. You're just quoting it. It takes you one step off and can ease that. How many of you in 3rd grade would say, what the, quote, crap, unquote, are you doing? Because if you quoted it, it wasn't like you didn't swear or something like that. See, so there's the same basic trick. And there are a few more, but do you get the idea of strategy now? So somebody summarize strategy for me.
How are you gonna get your reader involved, interested, invested in your paper while keeping them open and collected?
Exactly. So every time you have a strategy, there's a goal you want to accomplish, like keeping them interested and open, and there's a method by taking the other side, by having common ground, by being funny. Some way to accomplish that. So there's strategies, and I hope as you read or watch movies or something, every once in a while, I hope you'll rhetorically say, look how they did this, look how they framed the camera, look how they structured the story, whatever, and ask yourself, why did they do that? And be aware of the way they put their argument or their story together, and how it made it more interesting or more made you curious or whatever effect they were going for. And that's one of the biggest values that we're going to get out of this final paper, is that you will anticipate audience reactions. You'll be so aware of how every one of your arguments and your writing style and everything will affect them, that you kind of prepare for it and make sure it's affecting them the way you want them to. Is that manipulation? What do you guys think? Is it unfair? Let me ask it that way. Is that bad?
No,
Why not?
this is how I see things.
I'm glad that somebody think about it. Why is it okay, or why is it not okay?
I want you to restate the question because I was writing it.
Sure. Is it manipulative and bad to use strategy to keep people open and interested in whatever you have to say? motivate them to do the action that you think they should take? Is that
Heck
a
no.
problem? Why is it not? I mean, shouldn't we just let everyone make up their own mind? You know, isn't that freedom? Isn't
Well,
that
yeah,
the
but you
best?
also have freedom of speech. So it's like, if
Yeah.
you're gonna put this out there, you can do your best to make them feel okay with what they're doing and make their own decision. So if you really value letting them make their own decision, maybe at the end of the paper you say, well, this is how I feel and these are the points that I think make this important and unique. But what do you think? You know, make them think about it and then they might
Yeah.
think about your paper more. But for me, it's like they have the choice to read the paper or not.
Yeah.
Regardless of if I try to not be biased or if I am biased. It's like they have a choice before they even pick it up.
Well, at the end of your paper, when you get to that point to make sure they're free, should you make a concession to say, I want to point out that I kind of sucked you into being interested in this paper by including this story. So take that into account.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, you don't like hurt yourself, you know? Like you built yourself up so awesome, by the end of it, they're like,
I know, but aren't you manipulating them? Isn't that not nice?
What?
Manipulating them into having fun and getting
Well,
excited? Isn't that a problem?
They're not being manipulated. If I read something and I don't like it, I don't like it. I mean, I
Yeah.
decide if I going to be manipulated by something that I read or not.
Yeah.
So, no, it's not.
Okay, good. How many of you agree with Jessica? How many think it's kind of a problem to be a really good writer or orator? Okay,
I
good.
mean, as long as you're not like misrepresenting things. Like,
Yeah.
If
If
you're
that,
just like lying and misquoting people and taking stuff out of context, then you really are being like manipulative.
right.
But as long as you're just using your own, rhetoric, that's fine.
Okay, good. I'm glad you all think that way. That discussion was for anybody who, really here's what it comes down to. People who would worry too much about that are the people who feel responsible for everyone else's feelings. And the fact is you're not. Your job is to have your best opinion, represent it clearly, and if everyone was not being manipulative and stating their opinions and giving their evidence and stuff like that, taking their stance clearly, then everyone else could pick and choose and compare and reach their own decision. If everyone's being nice and muddled and boring and whatever and ineffective,
we're gonna go in
It's-
circles.
yeah, it's like, I'm tired of trying to find the answer to child labor. I'm gonna go watch a cat video on Facebook. Whatever, right? So if everyone was good presenters, we'd all be a lot more informed, I think. So yeah, so figure out your best stance. Take a strong stance if you want, it doesn't have to be strong, but express it as well as you can. Get your job done, and then let people go from there.
So is it like, think of like politicians and like in elections and stuff when they misuse
Yeah.
statistics,
Yeah.
and they know they are kind of, but
Yeah.
they know people won't go back and check. Like, is that
At least not
still
till the next
considered
week.
ethical? Like,
No. It's considered effective by politicians to get elected. Because most people are dumb and have short attention spans and are biased and emotional and don't fact check and the alternatives seem so heinous to them, they're not, whatever the case may be. So they consider it effective, but nobody considers that ethical. How could they? Yeah, that's why they have PolitiFact and all these fact checkers after the fact trying to.
so like they even know that, but they know most people don't actually follow up on
Right.
that. So they
Or
they can say a fact that's not even relatively true, but
Yeah.
the majority of the people will hear the first statement and not the actual correction.
Exactly. It makes that first impression, and it's hard to beat a first impression. It takes a lot more work. So, yeah, so a lot of unethical stuff. So hopefully, if you guys are all educated and aware of this, next election comes around and someone does that, hopefully instead of just saying, yeah, I agree with him on gun rights, you say, what a schmuck. I wish we had honest politicians. And I wish money poured out of my nose when I had a cold. Yeah, it's not gonna happen necessarily, but yeah. But what if we did? What if you had an honest politician? You could represent your case adequately and still be honest and have an honest view. I think it'd work. I think somebody would pick up on that and say, wow, I respect that. A real statesman.
The candidate, Robert Redford, seen that movie?
Yeah, the candidate, yeah,
Doesn't happen.
yeah. True. Oh, well, we can keep
Well,
hoping.
people want the glitz and the glam, and so someone who's being honest and out there, you know, may not have that first impression like the other person, and so they kind of disregard it, which is sad.
Yeah.
Just uninformed.
I'd love to see what it's when we try it, though. Especially if, you know, somebody who I agree with on their stances and stuff like that. But
I dare you.
I don't want to be a politician. You want to change the world? Go to Hollywood. That's what I say. By the time it's being made a law, everyone has already made up their mind about what's right and wrong and good and bad and stuff. I think the media has way more influence. Because how often do you pay $8 for a movie, sit down and say, ooh, I don't know, I don't agree with that political. You're like, oh, it's just a story. Open it up, totally receptive, ideas just flow in. So I think that's where way more power happens than politicians. Although I think politicians should learn a lesson, and I think they should take part of their job is to sell the American public on what they think is right. Because they're just trying to do what the public likes enough they can get voted in again. How about letting the influence go both ways? Okay, so that's strategy. That was a good discussion. Any other comments on strategy? Are you at all excited or interested in applying a strategy to your paper and seeing how it works and seeing how influential and how much more interesting it can be when you do that? I hope so. And if not, as you plan some out, hopefully you'll kind of catch some interest. It makes it so much more fun to write when you're imagining real people and not just laying down these facts. And you're like, why does the order matter? They're just facts. They're all there. It's like cake ingredients. Why does it matter if we add the eggs or the flour first? You know? But if you want your souffle to puff, I was kidding. Order does matter. So.
You're just full of fun facts, aren't you?
Yes. I don't really know about souffles unless you put the egg up, the egg white, so it goes off. Here we go. Okay, there's part of my limited cooking repertoire. All right, so let's talk about structures then, and then we'll start working on your own papers. I've got a list here of half a dozen different structures, different organizations that you can use when you write your paper. And built into them is some strategy. Do you remember the one I was talking about a minute ago where you ask a question and then you answer it as you move along? That's the first one I'll tell you about. That's called the discovery structure. Start with the question, move along to the answer. Why is that a good structure to use sometimes? I can think of two main scenarios where that is the best choice.
What we're used to.
Because you're used to it? It is a common one. It is quite common. So people, as they read along, they know what to expect kind of stuff. Some people can skip to the end if they want, kind of thing. Good. Why else is that good?
Well, it's good for people who have a purpose in reading what you have. You're like, you know, they know what the paper's gonna be about, and so they know if they want to read it or not, maybe. You know what I mean? Like, if you're gonna answer this question, I'll know, you know, if I want to invest in the
Yeah.
paper or not.
So they know what the paper's about because you ask the question and they can decide whether they want to find out the answer. Good. Okay. When else?
That's what Google's all about.
That's true.
How they'll pull up your article.
We're becoming more, technology is building in Q&A. But we've always been like that as humans, aren't we? Curious, want to find answers, solve problems and stuff. Anything else? Let me tell you my two reasons when this is a great choice. What if your answer is going to piss off your audience? What if they're going to disagree with you and resist you? See the value? You start out, you're like, you could even use, if you want, you could turn it into a narrative. You could have a story, and some of you in 1010 wrote a paper as a narrative, where it was, you didn't even write about your research question and answer so much as your process of discovering. first I found this article and I thought, oh, that's cool. And then I found this other article and I thought, wait a minute, he was lying his butt off. And then, you know, on and on. So how many of you wrote a paper like that in 10-10? Okay, how'd you like that? Not so much?
I didn't like it.
Yeah. It's kind of pointless as far as the audience goes. Actually, you can make it really good, where people are like, oh, and they're going along your journey of exploration with you. They're like, oh, I get it, oh, I get it. Sometimes you already have all the pieces and you can write it that way in order to lead your readers from one idea to the next. But the main purpose of that one, I think, is to make you think about how you do research and how you learn from research. So it was like an assignment in itself. It wasn't so much a purpose and audience kind of thing. So I think maybe for that reason it was a little bit less interesting, maybe, but that's on value. Anyway, you could do a narrative where you're like, I had this question, I wanted to know, so I went and started finding some facts, and you can lead to the answer, and by the time you reach your conclusion, your audience has been receptive and open and they've been cooperative the whole time. It's too late, your idea's in, even if they didn't want to agree with you. So one is if they're going to disagree with you in the beginning, and two is to get their interest, to make them curious. So, okay, the second structure is the opposite of the discovery. It's called the support structure. And this is where you start with your claim, and then all through the paper, or your thesis, all through the paper you prove it. The ideal spot for nuclear waste depository is in Elko, Nevada, because nothing grows there anyway. Whatever, and then you just prove it as you go through. When is that a good structure to use for your paper?
But it is straightforward.
Yeah, people just want the facts. Just tell me, go along, just give me the information. You don't have to play with my emotions and curiosity. A lot of academic papers, when they're not worried about the pathos, not thinking too much about the audience, just want to supply the facts, that's just fine. The other one is where your thesis itself that's going to make people excited. They're like, the quickest way to make $1 million is, you're like, oh yeah, tell me more. Okay, quick way to make $1 million, oh, I don't want to read your paper. Of course, most things that start out, quick way to make $1 million, it's like, buy my book. At least it worked for me. But here's where so in other words, here's good when there's resistance, including boredom or lack of interest, apathy, and here's a good one when there's no resistance. Narrative, of course, you could use narrative with either one, but when is narrative good, where you're telling a story? Why is that a good structure to use? That's actually not so much a structure as a strategy. And it's just like anecdotal evidence. People can relate to it. It can be more interesting to read. They can see an example, stuff like that. So really, what I should probably put instead of narrative is chronological. What does that mean?
Tell the story.
Yeah, and it's in order of time. The first day of my summer vacation, I got up. Then I went downtown to look for a job. Then I hung out in front of the drugstore. On the second day of so it's in order. When is that a good structure to use?
When there's a process to your paper, or the subject.
Yeah, good point. When telling the story helps it make more sense. In other words, when just going through in order of time makes people interested and cooperative, and it makes sense.
But if you're telling a story like that and you take a couple of turns,
Oh yeah.
is that?
That's, yeah, fine, you could have a flashback. In fact, here, let me tell you the little key to doing that exact thing. Here's a story, here's the whole storyline. And this is, I was born, or whatever. And then I went to first grade, and then I turned 11 or something and became a Boy Scout. And then we went to the Uintas to climb Kings Peak for a week for our summer camp. And then we got to Dollar Lake, and then a moose walked into our camp and started stepping on our tents. And then I hit it over the head with a frying pan, and then it trampled on my head, and then Life Flight came and took me out, you know, etc. So what's the good part of the story here? Yeah, the moose and the frying pan. That's where the action starts. Okay, so if you're telling that kind of story, I say start there. Start with the action. Because then what happens is all this information, a lot of it, you don't have to tell about being born and joining Boy Scouts. Just all you need is a little quick flashback, you know.
Frying pan
I was
are
at Dollar
only
Lake.
for making eggs.
Yeah, you know, smack the moose over the head, whatever. We were 2 days into our scout camp in the high Uintas. See, it's a quick flashback. And so one thing that does is, if you start telling all this information, you give way too much and it goes on and on and on. But if you do it as a flashback, it just comes out nice and short. Because we already have the basic idea of where you're at, and so you don't have to tell as much information. It helps the pace quite a bit. So there's a tip for next time you write a chronological story like that. Start at the interesting point. Also, the introduction then, it accomplishes that purpose of capturing interest, you know? So if you were gonna start back here, you could at least hint, you know, when I was 11, I joined Boy Scouts. My mom had no idea it would lead to me hitting a moose over the head with a frying pan. Okay, capture some interest, you can, so that's kind of like super minor flash forward, but anyway. All right, so there's chronological. Then we also have, similar to chronological is spatial. What does that mean? Instead of an order of time, that's an order of what? Space. Yeah, not outer space, but just, you know. So let's say you're a nature writer and you're being descriptive and you're saying, or, you know, you watch one of those shows on PBS and it's like, in the Yellowstone lowlands, these flowers bloom and the wolves frolic as they rip the throats out of elk. As we climb the mountain, we find the grizzly is looking for moths in the summer. As we reach the high mountaintop, only the eagle, you know. So yeah, so you have an order like that. So this is really good if you're using even just a little story, maybe in an introduction or something. I call this the camera lens organization. So if you're talking about a football game, you know, there's a bluebird blue September sky, and then the camera kind of pans down. The stadium was filled with 70,000 crazed fans, and then kind of zoom over to the clock, you know, 4 seconds left on the clock, whatever. Or you zoom down to the field. The team lined up, you know, and then you get even tighter view. The quarterback stepped behind the center, you know, and puts his hand against his butt and says, "Home run, blue 42, blue 4." Okay, you know, then you can talk about the football player's hands, you know, his fingers holding tight to the laces of the football. One of those sensory details we talked about, right? You know, so you can go the opposite way. You know, the green ball sat on the hash mark of this 23-yard line. You know, the team's lined up. You know, 70,000 fans jump to their feet. Only 2 seconds left in the game. Their scream shattered the perfect blue September sky. So. All right, so on bias, this one's not so much bias, this is just like a bias alert check. So what I want to see on there is just, is there any part of your paper that you feel really strongly about? Like you think one way is the right way or something like that? Just so you know where your strong feelings are, so you can make sure and show both sides or be balanced when you get to that part.
Okay, so because I wrote, I will reduce my bias by selecting articles that have effective and non-effective coping methods.
Okay, so in other words, gathering good data from both sides, kind of. All right. And do you have any parts of your topic where you're really passionate about it?
That's hard to answer because I don't really know.
Oh, you need to find out more first before, okay, okay, good. So that could be your answer. You're like, not anticipating having bias, but you might not have a lot to say in that section. If you're, or you might, what you have to say might just be that you don't have a strong opinion and that you're trying to look for all sides. Talk about that briefly and that'd be great. Any other spots for anyone? Want clarification?
So the outline,
Yeah.
so this is like walking through my paper.
Yeah. This is as well as you can plan at this point. You don't have all your ideas and probably generated yet, but you probably have a pretty good idea. So as many points as you can make, try and make a fairly detailed outline. It helps you think through and plan, it makes the writing easier. It helps sell you on the writing process, so you might as well do that now. You can change your outline later as you write it, but the more aware you are of having an outline and a plan and a strategy and a structure now, the easier it is to do that in a good way. And hopefully not have to change because you've got it figured out. And remember on this part, on that part, on outline, you have to defend your structure, if you're doing discovery structure, tell why that's important for your audience and purpose. Any other clarification?
So you just said, like, you gave us those 10 things. You just want us to bold it, say, like, bias, and then explain it, and then go to the next one and bold it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a utilitarian assignment more than a write it out pretty. Because this one's really for you, not so much for an audience. As far as your audience, me, goes, I just want to see that you've planned it out because I want you to succeed in your paper. So for those of you who want to look at some examples, shall I just tell you about some of these papers and you tell me which one you want to look at? Or should I ask you if you want to see like a paper that starts with a narrative or a paper that's discovery or support structure? Do you have anything you want to see? Or shall I just
one that starts with a narrative.
narrative? Okay, I've got a few of those. Do you want to see one that has a longer narrative or that has a kind of short narrative and then gets to the point? Let's start with that. Yeah, let's start with that. You're like, either way is fine with me. Let's see. Do you want one on pornography or wireless security? We'll start with pornography. This is a fairly short story, I believe. It gets to this point. So here it is, the big naked elephant in the room. It's amazing how large of an impact a few words can have on your life. Hey Stephen, want to see something? It was Friday. a day most 10-year-olds associate with the glorious release from school and beginning of a weekend, which always ends up being far too short. My best friend and I had walked home from school together, discussing our plans for the few precious hours of freedom we had ahead of us. What is it? My buddy and I were pretty rambunctious kids. We would spend most of our Saturdays working together on some crazy project, like building a go-kart or figuring out the best way to jump off a roof onto a trampoline. The second day of weekend was reserved for church. P-O-R-N. I had grown up in an actively religious family and an actively religious community, but the most I knew about porn was that it was naughty and involved naked people. No one had talked to me about sexuality before. Because I didn't really know what it was, I said, sure. From that point on, my life would never be the same. My friend showed me a single pornographic website on his mom's computer, and all of a sudden I was different. No longer was my mind preoccupied with homework, superheroes, and how fast I could get on my bike. I started to think about porn. Pornography is one of those things that once it gets a hold of you, it's really tough to let go. It seeps into every other part of your life. Of course, at the beginning I didn't notice it too much. Whenever it was convenient, I would open up a new browser window and look at porn for a few minutes. Later on, those minutes got longer. Later on, it wasn't just when it was convenient. Later on, I would make time to look at pornography. I didn't know yet, but I had become addicted. So it's kind of switching now. It started out with the narrative, with the distinct story, and now it's more, it's kind of narrative, but since it's not really giving so many details about his life, you almost not call it narrative. It's almost kind of getting more into the claims and the factual stuff about his paper, right? Do you want to see some more and see how that blends in with when it stops being narrative and just facts? Okay, let's read a little bit more. I didn't know it yet, but I had become addicted. It's strange to think, a 10-year-old with an addiction, but that's what had happened. I started to crave porn. I felt like the desire was always there in the back of my mind, pushing me to get on the computer and look. I eventually got into the habit of saying to myself, this is the last time. I just want to see a little bit more and then I'm done. But a little bit more was never enough. I tried to stop countless times over the years, but it never worked. I felt so ashamed at what I was doing that I felt I could never talk to anyone about it. Of course, that only made the problem worse. When I was about 15, I had become so disgusted with myself that I considered suicide as a way out. I had the knife in my hands, but thankfully wasn't able to go through with it. That's what pornography addiction did to me. I felt like I was evil. I felt too ashamed to talk about it to anyone. I felt so alone. Unfortunately, I wasn't alone. Utah is the largest state in the nation in terms of porn use, so my experience is only one in possibly several 100,000 cases around the state and across the country. You might be one of these cases. See, now he's just did a switch, right? What did he do? Switched from?
That was from him to you.
Yeah, now he's clarifying his audience, isn't he? So let's see how narrow of an audience he gets here. You might feel exactly how I felt. If not personally, you probably know someone who has felt similar. If not, just wait, it'll happen. So how narrow is his audience?
Those who watch and those who will watch.
Yeah, there's like those who looked at it, whatever, maybe get addicted, and those who know somebody. So that's pretty broad. Now, as we go on, I think you'll figure out he's talking about people in religious societies, or communities, kind of thing, specifically, and has some things to say specifically to them. But what I'll say to you in this, like when you pick your narrow audience, I would say pick one of these groups. Maybe someone who is addicted or has started to get addicted, or something specific, and just address the narrow audience. Obviously, this topic applies to more than just the narrow audience. But if you write for your narrow audience and somebody else reads it, they can still get the information, and you can tailor it to that specific. So let's read on a little bit more. You might be one of these cases. If not, just wait, it'll happen. Statistically speaking, if you're a male reading this, I'm 93.2% sure that you were exposed to pornography before you turned 18. If you're a female, you're lucky. Only 62% of you have come in contact with porn by the same age. Now he's talking to his audience in second person, saying you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Why?
That's how his audience is being more perceptive and open to it, probably.
Yeah. If it works for your audience, do it that way. In more formal situations. You're not supposed to say I, you're supposed to say, not supposed to say you, just be objective. But this doesn't have to be formal. This has to be whatever works best for your audience. We all learned in elementary school that knowledge is power, and I'm here to tell you that's exactly correct. In order to overcome the issue, you need to be armed with accurate information about addictive processes, what happens to your brain in an addiction, and the negative effects of pornography. And once we have that knowledge, we need to spread it. So now you know what his paper's about. You know what he's going to explain about the neurology, the physiology about it, and then what to do about it. His call to action is spread this knowledge. So now did he get your interest? And now you know what the paper's about. So those are the two main jobs of the introduction. That was a long introduction, wasn't it? Double spaced, that was at least 2 pages. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The 10-page paper it is.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. My general rule of thumb is 10%, your introduction should not endure more than 10% of your paper. So if it's a 10-page paper, your introduction should clarify what it's about at least by the bottom of page 1 or so. Now, if it's really interesting and people are getting the point of what it's about, you can stretch that out a little bit longer, as long as you give them some information. But if it's just there to be an entertaining story, even a whole page is probably too long, because people want to start getting to the point. Is that enough of this paper? Okay, you want to see some more? Okay, you know where to find it. uoflife.com/UEU. And then click on Writing for Social Change. I should probably just change that to Final Paper, and then all those examples are right there. So it goes on, and it gives a lot of good, neurology facts, explanations about neurons and dopamine and all that stuff. But okay, what kind of paper do you want to see next? Do you want to see a different narrative beginning, or do you want to see a different kind of introduction?
Chronological.
You want to see a chronological? All right. So if it's chronological, it'll probably be a narrative. And if you click that top one, sample paper, final papers, this is from my semester before. And here's one it's a very long narrative, but it's making its point very effectively all along the way. The Plague of Fiji. Let's take a look at this. Well, I'm going to read some and then skip some. Dark solemn clouds loomed overhead as they let their moisture drop down upon the saturated land before. Huge raindrops splattered my windshield as I drove cautiously along the asphalt road, splashing through puddle after puddle. There was hardly any other drivers on the road, and absolutely no people walking alongside it. Even the markets we passed were desolate. Glancing over at the passenger seat, I saw Brother Lloyd staring out the window in awe. "This is crazy, man," he said incredulously. "Everyone's gone." "Yeah, they probably have more urgent things to deal with right now," I said in response. Brother Lloyd shook his head in disbelief as he continued to stare out the window. "This is nuts. I've never seen so much rain before." Neither had I. Brother Lloyd and I were both from a very dry state in the U.S. called Utah. We were counted lucky if we had even a tenth of the rainfall that Fiji got. This slow-moving storm had lasted for more than a week, and the constant rain was finally taking its toll on the town we were driving towards. What do you notice, by the way, about the Brother Lloyd? What do you think about that? Who do you think these people are? Do you have a guess? People who live in Utah? Yeah, they're LDS missionaries. So normally they say Elder Lloyd, right? So why does he say Brother Lloyd instead of that?
Don't get confused. They might not know what elder means.
Exactly, it's jargon, and it doesn't matter at all for his paper. So by saying Brother Lloyd, what impression does that give you?
He's someone who's religious.
Yeah, or at least there's some religious group, and like Christian missionaries in general going abroad to do some service, that's really common, and he doesn't have to get into the details of elder. Why do you call him elder? Kind of thing. So simplified for his audience there. Anyway, so they drive along, and there's this big flood, and everyone's trying to, get their stuff out of the flood, and it's rough. And let's read this paragraph here. "It was at this moment when I realized the gravity of another problem that was plaguing Fiji. Garbage littered the edges of the water and was piling into huge heaps against half-sunken houses, trees, and bushes. the floodwaters had exposed every ounce of trash in the area, and there was much more of it than I ever realized. Nadi was a mess, and not just because of the flood. It was plagued far before the floods ever came. So he starts talking about the garbage, and then he goes on, and as he tells stories of different areas about how people used to just, like, maybe they wrap their food in like banana leaves, but now it's plastic and cans, and they just throw it out the window. It used to decompose, doesn't anymore. And the richer neighborhoods can afford trash services, but not the poorer ones. And so finally, and you get tons of this information as he tells his story, and you meet these people, and it's, you know, nice description and stuff. And then when he gets more toward the end, then he starts saying his solution. It's like, look, this garbage in Fiji is hurting tourism. And so you people who have the resorts are making tons of money. He establishes how poor the Fijians are, how they average like 50 cents a day for wages, I think. And he says the resorts should pay for garbage services on the whole island because it's in their best interest and everyone's. So there's a long narrative one that works, you know. I've never seen such a long narrative work as well as that one, but it makes sense, and he's a good enough writer that he really worked hard at it. He wanted the challenge, so. Okay, what kind of paper would you like to see next? Is this helpful to see some examples now that you've started planning your own? Good. Let's just look at a very different one that's not narrative, just so you get a sense of contrast. Here's a good one. Options for the parents of intersexual individuals in a bigender society. This one's quite objective, but also well written. The society in which we live is based heavily on the ideal that only two genders exist, male and female. When going to the restroom, how many gender options do you typically find? Is it safe to assume that unless the restroom is at a family style facility, you find only two doors in front of you labeled male and female? Think about any and all the applications you've filled out with the hope of getting a driver's license or improving your salary with a new career, etc. When asking for your gender, how many options did the application provide? Only two. Finally, walk with me down memory lane, clear back to the days of elementary school, when your teacher, a highly organized and stern woman, separated the class into hushed lines to walk down the hallway. How did she structure the ranks? Easy. A line for the boys and a line for the girls. Why? Because civilization has progressed in such a way that the masses find it much easier to live in a society that can fit gender into two neatly arranged boxes, one for men and one for women. Women wear dresses and men wear suspenders. In our reality, a man in a dress breaks societal norms. He's a weirdo, a nut job, a disturbed human being. Boys play with action figures and girls play with Barbies. It's that simple. Women are women and should act like women, and the same goes for men in that order. But what if we lived in a world without predominant gender roles? What if society could accept people who weren't born into a box labeled male or female? Men could wear dresses without fear of being shunned. Little girls could choose to play with Hot Wheels instead of dolls. And intersex individuals could proudly mark other as their gender on applications. As the parent of an intersexual child, it is important for you to realize that until our society has a paradigm shift of normality, we cannot fully accept the intersexual individuals that exist in our community. What do you think of this approach so far? Who's the audience?
Anyone?
The end of the last paragraph got more specific.
Parents.
Yeah, parents of the intersex
Intersexual child.
kids, right? So are these parents like, so some people, you know, really conservative people would read this first part about boys and girls and they're like, yeah, I like it that way, so don't say anything against it, right? But these parents, you know, seeing kind of that questioning, whatever, they're probably, you know, welcome that, right? That's going to help them feel like they won't get attacked so much with the open mind and stuff. So let's read just a little more and see how this transitions out of the introduction. Hopefully your child's pediatrician has already explained to you what being an intersexual means. In the event that either this hasn't happened or the pediatrician was less than helpful in their explanation, allow me to break down intersexuality into its simplest form for you. By understanding what is happening with your child on a biological level, as well as the answers to common questions that people may have for you, you can be a better support system for your child. Let's start with the basics. It's a long paragraph, huh? That would have been a good place to break a paragraph. Let's start with the basics. I found the most common reaction to the word intersexual to be, isn't an intersexual person just someone who decides they were born the wrong gender? Aren't these people still technically classified as male or female? To this, I would simply start by responding with not quite. Go on to explain, oh, this is a note to herself. This is a draft of her paper. This is not the actual finished one, sorry. Go on to explain that the aforementioned is a description of transsexual individuals and lacks a critical part of what classifies a person as intersexual. An intersexual person is someone who is born with both male and female sexual characteristics, hermaphrodites. Imagine a sliding scale with males on one side and females on the other. On this sliding scale model, the majority of the population is either on the far left or far right, meaning the majority of the population has sexual characteristics that are either strictly male or strictly female. However, intersexual individuals find themselves with sexual characteristics falling anywhere on the scale but the far left or far right. Because of the nature of the sliding scale, the opportunity for varying degree of intersexuality is great. Even so, hermaphroditism can be conveniently categorized into 3 major subclasses. What's your impression of this author so far? How's her ethos?
Well, it seems like they're pretty well-rounded on their opinion, on how they're presenting it. You know?
Quite objective, right?
Mhm.
Pretty much just the facts, but what else? What about her writing style? What do you think of her writing style? Is it easy to follow? Quite good at explaining, isn't it? Like the sliding scale, little way she describes and stuff, so that's good. Anyway, it's really objective, but it starts out with kind of some questions and like, this is society, boys and girls, you know. So that's her way of kind of discussing it generally and then leading into the specific. Kind of neat. Any other comments on this one?
So what is this one considered? This
Oh, the style? Actually, we're going to have to read just a little bit more down to the side because she's brought up a topic. She said, what if we didn't have gender roles? Hopefully your parents, your doctor told you what to do. Here's some information. So she hasn't come out with her thesis, conclusion, action yet, has she? She hasn't said, do this. She's just starting to provide information. And she started with kind of a question. I would probably put this under discovery, asking a question, what do you do? What's it about? And she starts to answer it, I think. Although sometimes discovery is like makes you super curious and just answers a little bit, like one of those 2-hour specials where like Rodney Knievel's going to jump his motorbike up onto the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, whatever, and it's a 10-second stunt, but they drag it out, and, you know, just making you wait, kind of annoying. This is not like that, is that? It's starting to provide the information right away, which is good, rather than being annoying. On the other hand, you know what? She presents one fact, and then the next fact, and the next fact, which kind of makes me think support, even though she hasn't made her main. Boy, good question. Well, as I said, you can mix these up. They don't have to be black and white. We could read the whole thing and decide, but at least it's a good logical progression. Okay, any other types of papers you'd like to see, or shall I pick one that's different than what we've seen so far? Different? Okay. Let me show you a really, really short narrative beginning. Wireless traps. In 2008, I would go onto Utah Valley University's wireless network, and I was easily able to look at everyone's files on their computers. I was able to listen to their music, see their personal pictures, and read their personal documents. The school had left the wireless network open, and at any given time there were 50 to 70 personal computers that I was able to access. People did not use passwords on their personal computers, and the school did not have adequate measures set up to prevent network users from accessing others' personal data. I could have deleted or stolen any files I wanted to. I'm not the kind of guy who would do this, but I'm shocked at how easy this is able to be accomplished. Many people every day have some of their personal information stolen because of the insecurities of wireless networking. Information such as account numbers, passwords, email addresses, physical home addresses, and social security numbers can be sniffed from the airwaves. This almost always happens on wireless networks that are not up to par with current best practices. It is not too difficult to secure wireless networks. Do you know what this paper is about?
Securing wireless.
Yeah, and specifically he's going to tell you exactly how to do it and discuss why as it goes through. It's quite a useful paper for that. Did it get your attention? So there's just a really short paper, a really short story, but really it's just, it's an anecdotal, it paints the picture like, wow, he could get into people's computers that easy to try and build a little significance, and hopefully you relate to it and think, I have no idea what my wireless network is, you know? So hopefully get your interest to read the rest. And then the next he includes one more story. The FBI busts into this house in Florida, arrests him for child porn. Well, it wasn't him, it was somebody who just kind of drive by and get his wireless and use his wireless because his wasn't secure. So the FBI tracked it to his house, but it was really, some stranger. So again, building significance, saying don't let this happen to you, stuff. Okay, let me find another one for you. Here's let's look at one that never takes a hard stance and lets the reader decide. Adderall and the effects on collegiate athletes. So the narrow audience is college athletes who are considering taking Adderall to get better grades. At the beginning of a new school semester, students are given a class syllabus stating everything the teacher offers is fair to all students no matter what race, religion, or gender they are. But how can we make education fair to everyone, especially athletes, if some students are taking drugs that help them excel in their studies? The pressure put on student athletes to maintain a certain GPA is more than the average student's load. To keep up with the average, athletes are starting to consider whether or not taking Adderall to help keep up with their GPA. The drug Adderall is becoming more known, so it kind of starts out like, this is the question I'm going to address. This is the situation going on. This is the problem, kind of the question. The drug Adderall is becoming more known as the Ivy League crack, rather than a stimulant for patients who are diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD. It is being prescribed to students and athletes who use it as a super enhanced concentration drug. In the same study, it shows that students taking Adderall have studied for longer hours and improved their test scores. So do you think she's pro, at this point, do you think she's pro take Adderall or against?
I don't think she's taking a stance.
Okay, yeah, she hasn't taken a stance, but so far she just made a point like, hey, it improves your test scores. So athletes who are enticed by this, that sounds exciting. They're going to read on, aren't they? Let's read some more. For students who are involved with collegiate level athletic teams, like myself, have to maintain a 3.0 GPA to keep their scholarships. Between practices, games, having a social life and work, there seems to be little time for actual studying. Trying to find time to study for 12 or more credit hours can make a person feel like they've already been defeated. Finals are stressful. So she's saying, here's your situation, audience. Here's how you feel. I get you. Stuff. Here's where Adderall comes in. It's important for you as a student athlete to know about Adderall before deciding to take it. So she's not saying you shouldn't take it, let me tell you why, which might turn off some of her audience maybe. Anyway, I think she just wanted to be objective, lay out all the facts and let them decide in true academic form, right? It's important for you to, for starters, what purpose was the drug developed? Some background, talks about how it works in your brain. Talks about illegal drugs and how selling Adderall, when you're not prescribed, is a Schedule II stimulant. So that's illegal and stuff. So she didn't organize that by, here's why some people take it, but here's why it's bad. You'll go to jail and you'll get addicted and whatever. She just said, here's all the information kind of gone out. So anyway. Was that helpful to see some sample papers? Good. And as you put your paper together, I would encourage you to come and just click here on Writing for Social Change, unless I change that to Final Papers, and just skim through